Here we are in the Baltimore and Ohio subdivision with our Berkshire steam engine on a clear winter's day. And I had done in my previous video an in-depth and great detail how to run the engine in the most efficient and effective manner. Hopefully people have had great success running their steam engines in Train Simulator Classic and been able to climb hills, and even if they come to a stop, how to get back going again. I want to explore a little bit more today and really the expert mode, because previously I used the arcade HUD, which I just put up now, to help explain what's going on in running a steam. I want to today to remove the HUD and just use the gauges and the valves and the knobs and everything that's in front of us, and yeah, like a simulator. So let's get this one going. If you remember, typically for expert mode, you can bring up all of the data on the top left-hand screen like that. But I wanted to discuss with you something that maybe some of you may not agree with, and that is using the auto fireman. And I'm going to take that data off for the moment. And maybe I didn't get into the great detail of all of the different controls that we have in the cab last time. And let's go do that. And with that in mind, I wanted to discuss what the fireman does. So if you don't have auto fireman on, then these things would have to be done by you, the engineer, because you don't have a fireman sitting next to you. That is really, in my mind, not practical. But that's what we were doing last time when I was discussing, expert controls versus, using the arcade HUD. But the fireman has two functions that must be done, and that is to keep the fire going and have the right amount of coals in the firebox. And the other function would be, let me put up the fire mass is on the top left screen there, and it shows 3,500 pounds. And I find between around 3,700 to 3,900 is the ideal mass to keep the fire going at its optimal. For this particular steam engine, different steam engines would be different. And of course, we spent a lot of time last time talking about steam generation rate and that kind of thing. But the way you'd have to do this, if you don't have the arcade HUD up, is you'd have to do two things to keep the fire going. Is you have to open these doors, which is, I find, to be very cumbersome with the mouse, even on a good day, and turning these knobs, and I find that to be cumbersome even on a good day. So I recommend, if you want to do the fireman job, that you use the keyboard to do it. I think the firebox, to open that, is the F key, and if I remember, the R key would stoke. Now that's this one here, the stoker motor. Open that up. You will notice right now that there's nothing moving down here. So not only that you have to open up the firebox, you have to get the coal delivered into it. So there's two functions you have to do if you're going to do the fireman job. One is open the box, and two is to turn this knob to get the stoker shaft moving the coal into the box. That's just for the fire mask. So, and these gauges could be of help, but as you stoke, you'll see the needle go up. I cannot show you how to do that at the moment because I got auto fireman on. I actually want auto fireman on. But I'm telling you what you have to do if you have it turned off. You have to open this box, and you can use the F key or the mouse, and you got to turn this stoker motor to go pushing the coal in. Also, when you're sitting still, you're going to want to turn the blower on, and that's this one up here. Once you get going, you don't need a blower to blow. I mean, you're moving along the rail. So, but when you first get going, so those three knobs are the key ones that the fireman has to do. Also, the fireman has to make sure that you have enough water in the boiler. And, as long as you don't let the water dry up, you're not going to blow up. But it's not going to give you the best steam if you let it get down to 50%. Or I find that you want the water in the boiler tank to be up there in like the 80 to 90% or better. You don't want to be cooling down the boiler if you're struggling to keep the steam generation up. But so the fireman has to do his two jobs. He has to make sure that the water gets into the boiler, and he maintains a good 80-90% of the boiler tank is full. And how does he do that? Well, the way you do that is you got two knobs down here. You got the exhaust injector and the live injector water. Both of those knobs have to be opened up, and then you got to pull this handle up. Those three steps have to be done. Open up this injector water, open up this exhaust injector, and pull this injector steam valve open, and then the water will fill up the boiler until you have enough water in the boiler to satisfy you that you're always going to be generating enough steam pressure, boiler pressure. That's a lot of activity for an engineer who's trying to manage the steam generation rate, because if you remember, the way you manage steam generation rate is with the regulator, which, the throttle is what we refer as the regulator. It says regulator up on here in our data. And also balancing between the regulator and the reverser knob is how we gonna do the steam generation rate, keeping it within balance. The engineer is always going to be busy doing that no matter what. As you can see, I'm playing with the brake handle for the independent brake for the locomotive, and I want to relieve the main train brake to get the brake up to 90. So what I guess I'm trying to say is, if you want to not have the auto fireman feature, and you think expert control means you're doing everything by hand, then you're going to have to manage the steam. You're going to manage the steam generation with these knobs over here as an engineer, but you're going to have to manage the boiler. That's a lot to do for one person to keep up with. That's opening the firebox and getting the stoker going. Two things you have to do. You can use the keyboard. I think it's F and R, and also keyboard here. I think it's L and K. And then for these knobs to keep the water going and pull that up. In between all that, you're jumping around and trying to run the train. I actually have got it set up now, and I hope you don't think this is what could be considered expert, because I'm looking at expert being running the train without any HUD. And I don't mean just the arcade HUD, no HUD at all, just using the dials. But I do want auto fireman, so the fireman takes care of the boiler, and I take care of the steam generation by balancing these things. Now, one more thing. I think everybody's up to speed on that. Before I beat that to death, but I'll turn on the engine light, turn on the gauge lights, turn on the outside, those lights there. I can get some air in here like that, opening up that. Interesting things to know. The actual numbers we see with the expert HUD up on the top left there, those numbers don't quite match the gauge. And you know what? I don't worry about it. I don't even have to look at those numbers. Basically, if I see this needle is getting straight up and down, I'm getting too low on my steam generation. I'm not putting this on the fireman. The fireman, if he's doing his job and keeping the fire mass up and the boiler water up, then the steam generation rate all has to do with me running the engine. And so if this needle starts getting way up above, I mean straight up and down, I know I need to, I kind of want to keep this needle where it is, or even over that mark, to be honest with you. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that. The other thing I talked about is, I wonder if I can move this out of the way. I talked about, I wasn't sure about this gauge here. This gauge here, the white needle tells us our steam chest pressure. I was confused last time. I wasn't sure what was going on. This gauge over here, this brass gauge, that is the boiler pressure. That tells us whether or not we're doing a good job with our steam generation and balancing that between steam usage. So that's the boiler pressure. This is the steam chest pressure. In fact, the white needle, if you can read it here, tells you the steam chest pressure, and the red needle, I think, is telling you the back pressure. So if these needles get out of whack, and you'll see if you put on too much throttle right away, you'll see a separation between the white and red needle as the white needle goes way up. I believe, and I will need an expert to tell me, but I believe you're going to get the most efficient stroke if your back pressure and your forward pressure, your back pressure and your chest pressure are getting close to matching. So you're getting a good forward and back stroke, and not leaving it all on one stroke. And so that does, I find, helpful. But for the most part, unless you get way out of whack, these needles they usually stay together, and it's good. So I think you're pretty much ready now to run this engine without any HUD, just using these dials. Everything you need to know. I like to kind of go out the window here and look in. I feel like my computer's lagging a little bit, probably because the OSB is recording everything while I'm running the game. I also decided to try running this in DX12 as an experimental thing right now. But you can see everything I need to see for running the engine. If I got an auto fireman on, I could see all I need right here. I can see my speedometer. Straight up and down is a little bit more than 35, and a little to the right, straight up and down on the speedometer is 40 miles an hour. I can see whether the two needles are matched up here. Of course, I'm not running right now, and I can see my boiler pressure. Also can see the brakes. So I want to talk about the brakes and handles. We already know that the big handle here is is the regulator or throttle. So one of the things I was watching a real engineer drive a steam, and one of the things he said that I want to pass along is make minor adjustments. Don't make big swooping adjustments like with the throttle or with the regulator. Just make minor adjustments so you don't be jerking around the cars behind you or the passengers. Just take it and feel it out. It's a lot of feel to this. In a live steam engine, it's kind of harder than simulator, but keep to making the minor adjustments. But the reverser, we're going to put that all the way forward until we get going. And I could see down here, whether it's all the way forward or not. And then this handle here is for the for the bell, which if you go out front, you can hear the bell going. This larger handle here is for the sander. If you're on a grade, you may need to sand. You can put that handle on. Let's turn the bell off. And then we have our brake handles. So I'd like to zoom in a little bit so I can still see everything and then see out the front. So this is a kind of a perfect screen. So let's get going. So the way to get going, we're going to throw the reverser all the way forward. We're going to give a little throttle. Oh, I did not explain the brakes. I guess I can explain that. Before we get moving, we need to explain the brakes. So I'm going to come back in here for a minute. The brakes work a little different than your typical diesel engine because unless you're driving passenger cars, but the way you want to apply brakes is you have to take the train brake and put it all the way into a release position, and then you're going to move forward a little bit to get into running. If you need help of where you are, you can turn on the HUD and it will tell you on the top left corner 25% into running brake. But when you want to apply brake, you just give a little bit more until you see the white needle start to come down. So we got a slight application and the white needle's coming down. When we find we got it down about 5 pounds or so, we can take it back to lap, self-lap. This is different from a diesel freight. When you're running the diesel engine and you take it off of passenger mode and you dial it into freight, this is what freight does, is it changes the brake system. So when you apply a brake, it applies the brake, and there's no turning it back. Unlike a passenger train, when it's in passenger mode, you can apply a little brake and ease off the brake. You can apply a little and ease off the brake. This is more like that. So you can actually ease off the brake by holding it in the self-lap position to the 5 pounds. Let's say right now or 10 pounds. I got the white needle at like 80 pounds, so I'm applying about 10 pounds of pressure. And actually it looks like a little more. And if I'm going downhill and I'm still going too quick, I can then go back up and use a little bit more application on the brake by putting it back into apply mode until it drops down a little more, and then go back to self-lap until it holds. Until you find the right braking pressure to hold you as you go down the grade. This is for going down the grade. Also, when you're going down, you want to put your reverser forward. So the full piston is being lubricated and you're getting a full stroke. Where, that's going to help a little bit too, throwing your drive into a full stroke and making sure those pistons get lubricated and you get a full stroke out of it. This is only for going down grade. And then lastly, if you find that you're starting to go slower and slower, you can easily lift off by easing up on the train brake until you see the white needle go back up again. Then you go self-lap, and you know, whoop, I hit it on apply. So you have to kind of practice. You can feel it in the real engine because they got notches, but in the simulator, you have to kind of practice. You may want to leave the HUD up on the top left to see whether you're self-lapped or not. So I want to ease up now, so I'm going to ease up by going back to running and then back to self-lap. If I want to release it, see what happens, and then now I only got 80 pounds of, not 80 pounds of pressure on the brake, but you know, it's actually 10 pounds of pressure on the brake because I dropped it 10 pounds. But if I want to release it all together, I go back to running or release, but make sure you get it back on running. Running will work too, and it'll go back up to 90. So, once again, you want to apply a little brake. You apply brake, you watch the needle go down a little bit, and then you go to self-lap, and it'll hold it there. And if you need to release, you release, and then make sure it goes back to running. Okay, I think everybody understands that. Well, here's what I'm going to show you now. No HUD at all. I don't need any HUD particular. And let's get ourselves going here. A little bit of throttle. And they take a minute or two to get going. There we go. We'll blow it out any water out of the steam chest. Just a couple strokes. And another little thing that, as I was watching an engineer run a rail steam, what they were doing was as soon as they got up and moving, they started pulling back on the reversing. Right away, they started to ease back on the reversing. I got it back. Maybe what I'll do is I will put up the HUD, even though I tried not to run the HUD. I'll put up the HUD for your sake. If you're able to zoom in and read that HUD, you see I got it on self-lap. I don't really want it on self-lap. I just want it on running, so I brought it back, the brake back to running. But I got the regulator on 20%. So if it's going a little too slow, you may want to put the regulator up a little, so I put it up on 55%. But there's no need to have it way up anymore. And give it some more throttle, some more regulator. I got with me today some passenger cars. Kind of nice. You look out the window. And this observation car. Beautiful. What I forgot to do was give it two toots on the horn before you move forward. You know, as you come into stations, I like to give a warning, you know, a half mile or so before I come to a station by blowing a horn so they know it's coming. And then once I come up on the station, I turn the bell on. So we're actually coming up on the station now. But, you know, what I really wanted everybody to see is driving the train without any HUD at all. It's helpful for the brake to have that expert HUD on. But once you get used to the brake and you can tell what's going on with the needles, the brake needles, you don't need anything at all to drive this train, provided you have it in auto fireman. If you don't have an auto fireman, you're going to be jumping from this seat to the next seat to get everything done, because you have to basically jump over here to open. Well, you can use the keyboard commands, but you're gonna be having to jump around or use the keyboard commands. And you're going to have to work these valves here for the boiler. So I don't see that using the auto fireman to be a cheat or any less than being expert, because the auto fireman does not balance the steam generation. The engineer does, and the engineer is doing that with the steam usage based on his regulator and his reverser, and and managing the speed. Those three things: managing speed, regulator, and reverser. All those together to give you the steam generation that's going to keep the boiler pressure on the steam chest. So that's all that is needed, and no HUD needed. No HUD needed for this operation. So it's up to you whether or not you want to use the auto fireman. I actually very much do enjoy having the auto fireman checked. Let the fireman do his job. I do my job, and I just enjoy running the steam. And I still have to. I don't have to use the HUD at all, but I still have to keep an eye on all my gauges. Alright, I just wanted to keep this video nice and short, and so I can show you all the valves and everything that is needed to be done within the cab. There's a lot of other valves in the cab. I mean, there's one other valve we talked about last time. If you don't use to blow out the steam chest, you can use this valve down here that blows out the cylinder cocks. You can do that with a keyboard command, or you can do it with this valve here, as you can see. I got where all these valves and stuff is kind of cumbersome to do with the mouse. So I really do, if you have a real driver, even better, or you can do it with keyboard commands. But nevertheless, no need for any HUD at all, and you can enjoy driving the steam just like you're seeing it right now. So hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully you enjoyed the fact that I kept this one a little bit shorter. Go out there, enjoy running steams, and within time you'll feel like you're an expert.